since neither you nor your opponent were at our forum, this will be a half hour. It'll be kind of a little bit more informal than the forum was. It's kind of more of a conversation, I think, as we've done in the past with you. Why don't we just start out by having you kind of tell us why you want to keep doing this? Doesn't look like fun from afar. So.
Well, some days are better than others, but I guess most jobs are like that, right? I mean, if you're a nurse at Alina right now, you're not having a very good day either.
That's a good point.
Everybody's replaceable, and we were very concerned for the Arrowhead region when we lost Sam Solon, Doug Johnson, Bob Lassard, Roger Moe. All kind of at the same time. Mm-hmm. And I kind of see the Arrowhead region kind of in the same spot again. Eric Simonson being the exception. I was going to come over to the Senate, and Eric's young enough he should be able to be around for a while. But you got me, Thomasoni, and Saxog all in our 60s, probably all going to go about the same time. And I feel some responsibility to mentor along some rural legislators because seniority matters. Learning the ropes of how to get things done, how to build relationships is something that senior members, I think, have some obligation to do. So I've got some rural members that I'm trying to work with to bring along. It's much harder for rural members of the legislature. I mean, you have to leave home. So if they don't feel like they're being productive and effective because of the complications of having to live away from home and be gone, it's hard to hold them. So I think helping them become effective is kind of one of my responsibilities. There are still a few things I personally would like to do. I met with the Rural School Board Association this summer, and something has to be done with the education funding formula to support small mostly rural schools. The perfect example is in International Falls. Not that that's that small, right? But it's only 6,000 people now.
Smaller than it used to be.
Yeah, half the size it probably was. Mm-hmm. So I'm a supporter of post-secondary option. I think Perpich was really smart about that. But even though I support it, there are places it's not working very well. And International Falls is the classic example. 40% of their 11th and 12th graders are going to the college down the street. I mean, right down number 11, right? So you take a big cohort of people out, the money flows with them, and it's the right thing for most of those students, I think, but at the expense of the K-12 school. So the kids that are left, there's only, I don't know about this year, but last year there were 5 kids in their upper division math class in 11th or 12th grade. 5. Well, they get paid for 5 from the state. So how do you maintain curriculum? It's about more than just declining enrollment. In their case, it's post-secondary option. In most places, it's declining enrollment. So I want to spend some time, and it may be kind of one of the last things I do, trying to figure out, unfortunately, and changing formulas always costs money, so that you don't create winners and losers in it. You gotta, everyone has to at least be held harmless in new mechanisms like that. But consolidation's only going to go so far. You get to the outer bounds of people just can't commute any further, and schools are part of a community's identity, and kind of like the post office, right? I mean, if you don't have a school or a post office, the town pretty much dies. And so I do think that's one of the critical things facing rural Minnesota. A lot of people talk about broadband. Tina Smith's traveling all over the state talking about broadband. I wish she understood my cell phone doesn't even work everywhere. And broadband certainly is important, but businesses aren't going to grow or thrive. Families aren't going to thrive in an area without a good school that has a good curriculum. So I think it's one of the really, and no one's talking about it yet, and I'm gonna raise the level of that this session. Because we do probably, I assume, we're gonna have a little bit of money around, so there'll be an opportunity to do some things. But you gotta take on powerful groups to do that. I mean, it takes, Education Minnesota won't like it, you know, because they're not gonna like siphoning money off that otherwise could have gone to the general formula and been available to bargain across the table with. But that is, if I can think of a issue I want to start working on this session, that probably is it.
You said it might be one of the last issues. Are you nearing the end of your career, are you thinking? Or?
I turned 62 this summer.
Yeah.
Everyone leads some.
Are you ready? Is this your last term if you're reelected? Is that what you're saying?
You know,
or you're not going that far?
I built a new pole building at home with a 13-foot high door, and it has that so I can get an RV in it, which I don't own today. But at some point you start thinking about leaving.
Yeah.
And there is nothing easy about being leader. And that's why speakers come and go so often, is it's tough to keep kind of everybody in the corral, right? And raising $5 million for a campaign is a big job.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I want to do another campaign.
Mm-hmm.
So I just, when my heart's really not in it, I'm going to leave and turn it over to somebody, you know, maybe younger, maybe with more energy. We all get a little less energy as we get older. Right now, I really want to run.
You want this reelection?
I want this one bad, because there's some things like that school issue for small schools I want to try and do. And I'm in a position where I probably can get it done. I mean, the governor will never admit this, but I'm the person that did all the kindergarten. It was me. It's an interesting story because I had a caucus in early December, I want to say the 6th, after the election, we get everything reorganized. And one of the things I asked the caucus members in 13, or it was the end of 12 actually, is, okay, what do you guys want to put up for the first 5 bills? And so come to me with ideas. No one came with anything. So now we're butting up against 1st of January. I want to introduce the kind of priority bills to show kind of what the priorities are for the Senate. The only guy that brought me an idea was Leroy Stump, who wanted to model vocational technical school after what they had done in Tennessee, the free vocational school. So we did that as one of our priority bills, and we accomplished that. So we're kind of, I think last year's graduating class were the first ones that are able to access free trade school in those occupational areas that have shortages, not everywhere. So no one else had an idea. So I put the minimum wage up as one of them, and I put all-day kindergarten up as one. And I went and found authors for them. Leroy carried the vocational bill. I went to Greg Clausen from Apple Valley to carry all-day kindergarten because he had just retired, elected in 12, and really good guy, lifetime educator, principal, and I knew he knew education, so I went and asked him what he thought about the idea of all-day kindergarten, because a lot of schools had it, but the state was only paying for half of it, right? So, and in some cases, some school districts were paying up to $4,000 to buy the other half day. Some were charging for it, especially in the suburbs. And then some schools just didn't have it, or it was paid for at the expense of other curriculum. So we put it in our K-12 bill. We run it right up to the finish line with the governor and Thiessen, and we're sitting around a table trying to close up the session the last couple days. And Thiessen doesn't want to do it. He wants the money on the formula because that's what admin wants. The governor only wants to do it for kids on free and reduced lunch. We'll pay for it for the free and reduced lunch population because it's just too expensive. It costs $135 million a year to do. And we finally got to a point where I just slammed my frickin' fist on the table and I said, you guys figure out how you're gonna like all-day kindergarten because I'm not going home without it. And we did it. And about 3 weeks later, I can remember where I was. I was just outside of Cook, headed home to the lake. My phone rings and it's the governor. And he says, boy, Tom, you were right about this all-day kindergarten. Wow, is it popular? As he was traveling around at the end of the session. And I raised that because no one knows I did that. Greg Clausen did that because he was the bill author. And later in the summer, when we had our Senate golf event, you generally have a caucus when you get people together like that, and most of the members were there, and Greg came around with the actual copy of the signed bill with the governor's signature on it. And he wanted all the caucus members to sign it, everybody that had voted for it. And I thought to myself, boy, did Irv Anderson do a good job mentoring me. Because it was Irv that mentored me. He was speaker when I came in.
Right.
And Irv taught me very early on that you can get a lot more done if you just plant ideas in the minds of other people and let them go. And I knew Greg would do it. And he did. And he got it done, and he was the author. But me, I know how it really happened. And but that's kind of my point about mentoring other people,
Sure,
to be able to pick up the ball and do things.
Senator, let's talk about this last session. No bonding bill, no transportation bill, lots of frustration.
Well,
What should have been done different, or what could have been done different?
You know, I think the House Republicans are wrong on transit. And kind of odd for me, outside of Duluth, it's odd for a rural legislator to probably talk about transit. But I can give my own personal example. My mother, my dad died 3 years ago. My mother now lives in a senior apartment building in Cook, and she can't drive anymore. And she told me once, I feel like I'm in jail. No transit, no chance. And what can you buy in Cook? Even if someone would give her a ride downtown, you can't buy any clothing. You can't, there's lots of things you can't do in these little towns anymore. And there needs to be, why can't we once a week anyway, twice a week? Have a bus that maybe goes to Virginia, or maybe comes to Duluth, or maybe drops them off at a casino or something, and it's just not available enough. And I don't really understand their animosity for transit. It's terrible, but it's held up. It held up the bonding bill because I told them that I'm not doing a bonding bill without transit in it. Because they had about $300 million of spending on a bunch of rural roads and nothing for transit. And all the transportation proposals that have been around both address transit and roads and bridges. And they just refused to do anything on transit. And so that really held up the bonding bill. The tax bill, there really isn't any dispute about that.
Is that because of their dislike for the metro train?
They don't like trains.
Oh, yeah.
I was standing up on the roof of the new Senate building one night with the speaker, just him and I. There's a place you can go to get away from anybody, right? And it's at night, and the green line to Minneapolis and St. Paul goes by. So it raised the transit issue. And I says, Kurt, you can't, just because there's few people on it, you can't think about the fact that, it's got an operating subsidy. Because these big infrastructure projects, in the case of Southwest Rail between Minneapolis and Eden Prairie, they are generational investments. And this generation's pretty wed to its cars. But the next one will be less, and the next one will be less. And someday transit people in the Twin Cities will wonder how we ever got around without it, as that area continues to grow, and that's where the population's growing. You just can't keep adding more highway lines. That's not highway lanes. That's just not that's not a transportation plan. And they just are reluctant to do it. I'm glad the governor finally executed a strategy to get it off the table, and that was difficult for him. I had asked him during the session if he would do that to get this kind of break the log jam, have the Met Council issue the bonds. And the problem he had, one, it's not the most efficient way to do it. They don't get the good faith of the state, so you don't get as good an interest rate. So it's not the most sensible way to go borrow $100 million. But the chair of the Met Council had written a letter in July of 15 to the House and Senate transportation chairs and said that the Met Council would not issue the bonds. And the governor had actually signed off on the letter. He told me at the time, I signed off on that letter that we're not going to do it that way. I can't do it. So he, in the end here, 3 weeks ago, he went back and said, well, it's the only way we're gonna get it done, even though they had written a letter saying they wouldn't do it. But it was the hang up in the bonding bill. There also is a problem with the transportation stuff in there, that $300 million that's in there, in that it earmarks specific projects, rather than giving the pot of money to MnDOT and saying, you know, based on your 20-year transportation plan, go fund, here's $300 million, go build some stuff based on the priorities. It actually picked projects and said, this one's 20 million, this one's 30 million, this one's 60 million by projects, and they weren't, a couple of them weren't even on MnDOT's list, 20-year plan. And not that they're not good projects, but you run the risk of transportation all of a sudden, the money flowing to people who have the influence. And that is not a good way to build a transportation infrastructure. Just because Tom Bakk is the majority leader, oh, guess what, we're gonna do 4-lane from Cook to International Falls. Well, you know, if members are gonna start to pick the projects outside of MnDOT's purview, that's a problem. So that they had all these projects earmarked in there. I actually came back and said, I don't disagree, and the speaker and I talked about it this morning. He actually told me this morning, I'm willing to take your language, my language. I had proposed to him over the, right up, well, at the end, we ended up passing his earmark language, which I didn't like, but they wouldn't send us the bill. We were frickin' out of time. They just kind of poked it down our throat. So I barely had enough time to put the rail on it and get it back to him. And I did get it back to him, and they decided not to take the bill up. That's what happened that last night, because they would have passed with the rail in it, because there was so much other stuff in the bill, so they just didn't take it up. They adjourned at 11:56. So I proposed to him after we had adjourned on the transportation piece, let's just take that $300 million and give it to MnDOT and say, these are the projects that are eligible for the money. And then if there's something in there that's not ready, MnDOT essentially would have the discretion whether to do the project or not. And if they didn't do it, well, then the money would sit there, and so a future legislature would figure out, or the money would cancel back, I think after 4 years. So he actually told me this morning, he says, Tom, I'm willing to take your language. So now the challenge is, can we convince Paul Thiessen, because the minority leader in the House he's not fond of my language either. He told me that. Just creating a pot of money and saying these projects are eligible to compete for it. So I think the speaker and I actually have an agreement. He met with the governor last Friday morning, and he committed to talk to Paul Thiessen. I think the governor and the speaker are in agreement. The speaker and I are in agreement. Now the question is, the governor will call a special session without all 4 leaders signing something saying this is going to be the scope and this is all we're going to do and this is what it's going to look like. So I think the speaker and the governor and I are all in the same place. Now we have to work on the minority leaders. I mean, I need 2 votes over in the Senate. We're not going to call a special session unless we have the votes to pass it, right? But both of them have to be House files constitutionally, the tax bill and the bonding bill. So they have to pass the House first. So Paul Thiessen really becomes kind of the broker at this point. And Kurt told me this morning that he would talk to him before this panel at noon. So no, I called kind of to, the governor told me Kurt was going to talk to Thiessen. So I called him this morning to see how to go with Paul. And he says, well, I've been really busy. I haven't talked to him yet. Okay. He committed to me he was going to talk to him by noon. The tax bill just kind of ended up collateral damage. You know, there was a drafting error in it that could have easily been fixed. It was an and an or issue.
Right.
And no one knows how it happened.
An expensive one, though.
Yeah, it was $100 million. But that could have been fixed. And even when I was taxed, those things happen. And when bills are hundreds and hundreds of pages, when I was taxed here, multiple times there was a mistake. I remember in the Cook Hospital District levy for their ambulance, there was a decimal wrong. Back when Doug and I were, when Doug was in the Senate and I was in the House. And the taxpayers just wrote a letter and say, hey, that wasn't our intent, this is how we intended it, and we'll fix it when the session starts. That could have been done, but I think the governor felt that there was a better chance to kind of get a global agreement on things that the Republicans really wanted the tax bill. Truth is, I really want the tax bill. There's a lot of really important stuff in there for a lot of communities. And for people. I mean, there's a good higher education tax credit for kids with student debt. There's a really important ag provision in there for ag country that in ag country they're having a very difficult time passing voter-approved operating levies because the burden falls so heavy on all the big ag landowners that we actually cut the levy on ag about in half, and the state paid for it with a credit in those school districts. So it is really important out in ag country for those schools. There's a lot of stuff in there that's very, very important. There's local government aid for cities all over the state, permanent increases, county program aid. I mean, so much stuff I don't even remember all that's in there, but a lot of good stuff in there. So it's too bad that it went down. I do think it keeps the pressure on for a special session, and I think that's probably what the governor was thinking. It'll just keep the heat on. They can go home without a bonding bill, but this tax bill everyone's going to want. And on transportation, in 13, I advised the caucus that we not pass the gas tax because the governor told me he was not going to do it, and he was afraid it doesn't poll well. He was afraid of the 14 election, another Obama midterm. He wasn't going to do it. The House Republicans weren't going to do it. The caucus in the Senate still wanted to pass it, and so we did. We passed a gas tax increase in 13, couldn't get the governor in the House to do it, so we passed it again in 15. This time the governor supported it, but the Republican House wouldn't do it. So I've had governor support, governor's non-support, House Republican non-support, House Democratic non-support, and now I got people running for office that twice voted for a gas tax and didn't get the money. It's like the cardinal sin of politics. Then you never vote for a tax increase, it's not going to become law. And I tried to tell them that in 13. So now when people are getting pounded on raising the gas tax, I'm going to say, I told you guys we shouldn't have done this, we couldn't get the money. But the truth is, too, someone's got to lead. And the gas tax is incredibly unpopular. But fixing roads and bridges is very popular, but there's this disconnect.
How big an increase are you talking about? Would it be enough to
Probably a dime.
Yeah.
Probably a dime.
It's pretty hefty.
Yeah.
And would it raise enough to keep MnDOT on track with its plan?
No, every penny is about $30 million. Okay. So a dime would be about $300 million a year. They say they need 600. Do they really need 6? Yeah. That's what they're asking for. Could they do it with 3?
You can do a lot with 300.
And maybe do a little something on, could do a little heavier on the bonding, trunk highway bonding maybe, if you got new revenue. So that would kind of stretch, I think, that dime out some. Some of that money goes to counties, some goes to cities, under the formula in the Constitution. There's room to do something on license tabs. Again, not very popular, but because you got to actually pay it in one chunk, one check. And this isn't going to sound much like a Democrat, but there's a lot of room at the lower end on older vehicles. Over 3 million cars, 52% of the cars on the road pay $35 a year. 52% of the cars on the road. Because it's 10 or 10 years, I think, they get to that lowest rate. Well, you can't fund a transportation system with $35 license tabs, And I remember when Ventura cut them in 99 or 2000, whenever that was, at that time it was 40% of the cars on the road were paying $35. We spent $177 million a year to cut license tabs, and 40% of the cars got nothing. So that's why I didn't think, that's the reason I remember the numbers. I thought, what terrible frickin' tax policy. We spent all that money, and 40% of the people get nothing. Well, now it's 52%. Because cars are lasting longer, they're more expensive, people are keeping them. So there's some room on that $35 number to bring that up a little bit, and you can just kind of do the math. I mean, if you brought it up even $10 on 3 million cars, 30 million a year.
First of all, did you agree with the governor on Twin Metals, the leases?
No.
Why not?
I think he was wrong. I think they should be given the opportunity to go through the process, right? And I mean, it's state ore down there. Most of it or all of it probably belongs to the permanent school fund. And the Constitution is pretty clear about school trust fund property is intended to raise revenue for schools. And just about all the money in the permanent school fund now, in the Constitution, came from mining royalties. And that project has been very, and maybe it's because it's in such early stages, but this whole boundary waters argument, that mine is from 2,000 to 5,000 feet underground. They're going to, half of the waste material is going to be put back in the ground.
Right.
And the rest of it is going to be shipped by rail. Probably the initial thought is they'd ship it by rail into the Lake Superior watershed over by LTV, where Polymet is. Those two projects will probably run as one someday, and it would be better to have one large tailing basin than have multiple tailing basins. So I think from a development standpoint, there's very few players in this business, and they're all kind of thinking about, well, what's the best overall strategy for the tailing disposal? I would bet you that of those people that are opposed to Twin Metals, not many of them know it's all underground. I was just in a Council of State Governments conference for leaders out in Idaho, and I toured a silver mine. And that ride from Coeur d'Alene out to the Lucky Friday mine, we drove over 20 miles of underground mine in those mountains.
Well,
No sign of any disturbance. It's just frickin' beautiful, but it's all underground. We got to the mine. They don't smelt there, and this new smelting process, this hydrometallurgical closed vessel stuff, is way different anyway. But it's a gorgeous country, and I want to protect the boundary waters as much as anybody else. But metals come from someplace, and the phone's got 26 of them in it, right? I mean, they don't come from the Menards store, right? And it'll be probably arguably probably the safest mine in the world that mines precious metals. I at least would like to see it get through, and it'll take 10, 12 years, just like Polymet did, to get through the whole review process and determine what's the best development strategy. But he's the governor. I just think I'm not surprised Twin Metals is going to sue him, or is suing the feds, and I'm sure they're going to sue the state. And that's the question I asked the governor. He called me and told me he was going to do that, and I said, well, you're really going to get trouble up north with it. And so then when I was over there about a week or two later, and I said, Governor, what did the attorneys say about the state's potential liability relative to terminating these leases? He said, well, they said it was within my authority. I said, well, that's not what I asked. I want to know, this company's got $350 million invested in Minnesota. Do we have any liability to all of a sudden just pull the plug on it? I mean, I wouldn't want to have to defend that case in court. So I asked him twice, and both times they said it was in my authority. Okay. I don't know if they hadn't contemplated the potential exposure that the state has, but we clearly have some. But if it can't be done safely, it shouldn't happen. It shouldn't happen.
Very quickly, future of Minsure.
That's a good question. Even if we defaulted to the federal exchange, nothing much changes. We still have all the same problems. I think the big question about Minsure is the Minnesota Care population that's in there, the working people. The provider tax expires in 2019 that pays for Minnesota Care. So that means everybody is going to be on the exchange, whether it's the Minsure state exchange or the federal one, unless somehow Minnesota Care gets extended in some way. Those people will be eligible for the federal tax credits. But there is not an easy solution to that. The interesting thing about it all is It's a very small percentage of Minnesotans that actually get their insurance through the exchange, that individual market. It's about 5% of people actually get their insurance there. When you take the Minnesota Care people out and the Medicaid people out, the actual people that are buying individually on the exchange is about 5% of the population. And you know, some of them are eligible for the federal tax credit, some aren't. I certainly would like it to work better, but we've got real trouble with the individual market I've kind of developed a pretty good relationship with Mike Guyette, the CEO of Blue Cross. And he called me to tell me that they were going to get rid of this Blue Cross individual market plan, and it was going to affect about 100,000 people. Now there was other plans they can go into, but this was kind of the Cadillac plan that had a very generous benefit set. But he was just losing too much money at it. I mean, like hundreds of millions of dollars a year that ultimately gets passed on to somebody. Somebody picks up the cost of all that. And so when they bid for those contracts to get counties, right? And it kind of, you bid by county, or the regions of blocks of counties, I guess. Is Preferred One was the first one to admit they came in way too low. And then they bailed on that individual market, and now Blue Cross is sitting there. And Blue Cross had told the Department of Commerce, we really have trouble with this individual market, we need some help on rates. And Commerce totally ignored them. Way back to last November, they told me they had started talking to Commerce saying, we got real trouble, we can't continue to offer this product. And under the Affordable Care Act, you can't cut benefits. So all they could do is terminate the whole plan, you know, and Commerce wouldn't work with them. So it's got to get fixed. I'm a believer in the single payer plan. I mean, we're the only industrialized country in the world. I mean, if you get accused of a crime, the government will pay for an attorney for you. But if you get sick, there's no guarantee you can go to the doctor. I think there's a question about that. I mean, we do it now, right? You just got to be 65 to get it.
Thank you, Senator.
No, you're welcome. Thank you.
We appreciate you
Thanks for
taking the time.
Yeah, happy to.
Best of luck.